Let's take a little turn here. Let's pivot once again. This is the case in which jury selection began just yesterday. This thing is the fourth time through the process. It's a murder trial against a Massachusetts woman by the name of Cara Rintala. She's accused of murdering her wife, Anna Marie Cochran Rintala. Now, this happened in March 2010. Let me check my notes here because it's hard to follow. You have two trials. The first one ending hung, the second one ending hung, the third one ending with a guilty verdict and a sentence to life in prison. That was back in 2016. So now here we are back again. Why? Well, because it was overturned because the prosecution used a paint expert. You're saying paint expert? What's that got to do with anything? Stay with me here. So authorities are called to this couple's home and they find the victim is beaten, she's strangled, she's in the basement, she's covered with paint. And they found that Rintala was cradling her body, comforting her, and they really described it as kind of this heart-wrenching moment, but the body was cold. So how long had she been cradling this body? She tells police that she'd been out driving around, doing some errands, and that she hadn't been there the day of the death. Surveillance footage, though, captures her at a McDonald's, dumping items into a trash can. Authorities retrieved 3 rags from the trash can, one of them containing paint and a faint blood stain. Rintala's first 2 trials, as I said, ended in hung juries, and then this conviction was overturned. The paint expert couldn't testify as to the timing involved in the drying of the paint. Are you with me there? So the case is overturned. Now we're looking at opening statements expected to begin next week. So it is going to be quite the case. What do you think, Rich? Is this going to be a battle of the paint experts in this case, or is that not going to be an issue that's retried?
I don't know. I mean, it's amazing, right? They got to a 3rd trial and had a problem with their expert testimony. You would think the 3rd time around the prosecution would be a well-oiled machine with the evidence they presented. And one of the jobs of the prosecution is to make sure there are no grounds for appeal. So even if you can sneak in some expert testimony that doesn't belong, you never want to do it precisely for this reason, that it can lead to an appeal and yet another trial. So I don't know all the issues in the case with the paint and the experts, but I would think the prosecution is going to be very careful.
Well, here's my thought on this. First of all, the paint expertise, I don't know if it depends on, maybe the expert didn't have the expertise to testify about it, or maybe the court found that there shouldn't have been any testimony about the paint drying. But Catherine, it seems to me there are errors all the time in a trial. And when you bring an appeal, you have your stack of errors. The court could clearly say, yeah, that was a mistake, but it was harmless. For the court to focus on that and find that it was reversible error, that's got to be critical to this case.
I believe so. Like you mentioned, it could have been just a harmless error. So maybe the qualification of the expert here was an issue, or something specific that the expert said during his testimony that was highly prejudicial and not harmless error for the level of the appeal here. And if I'm the prosecution retrying this for the 4th time, I probably not introduce a paint expert, but I will parse out what the appellate judges wrote as to what was the issue. But if I could, I will not introduce a paint expert at all and rely on the other overwhelming evidence that the jury found for her guilt.
Yeah, one quick follow-up here, Rich, because I'm assuming that the paint expert was used to determine time of death. That's my best guess. The paint was still wet, it was dry, whatever it was, that's the expert's use. Yeah, I'm assuming. So they got to come up with just another way to focus on time of death.
Right. I don't know how good the medical evidence is, the autopsy and that. My understanding of the allegation is that she was dead for many hours before it was phoned in, and that's part of the case against the defendant. But I don't know how good, if they do have other evidence to establish that and can stay away from this expert quagmire, then I agree with Catherine, they ought to do that.
Yep, we shall see if they are able to. Round 4, in this case against Cara Rintala, that gets into high gear probably next week. They're in the midst of the jury selection right now. Let's take a break. We'll come back. More on the other side. This is Law and Crime.